Hello and welcome to MovieTown, the LA Revival Cinema Scene show. I'm Andy Viner and I'm going to take you through my picks, recommendations for the month of August of screenings happening around LA and parts beyond. So, it's interesting. There were three kind of series that really jumped out to me for this month, and they're a little bit of your kind of prototypical, what you almost think of revival cinema as the director retrospective of a theater going deep into one filmmaker's filmography. And there are three directors getting that treatment at theaters this month: Akira Kurosawa at the American Cinematheque, John Waters at Braindead Studios, and lastly, Peter Greenaway at the Frida Cinema. So I want to start with kind of the big one there is Akira Kurosawa, and Janus Films has put out 4K restorations of many of his films. And so a lot of art houses and revival cinemas across the country kind of have this on the calendar in the next few months, and American Cinematheque is doing it here in LA. And it's a 10 film series. And Akira Kurosawa, to me, is one of those really interesting directors that once he hit a certain point with Stray Dog, one of the first films I'll talk about here, it's hard to pinpoint like a bad movie on his filmography, and there's a lot of films. And I think that's what makes a kind of a retrospective of his so unusual, is that you can't really place it into tiers. There's these kind of well-known masterpieces and then these lesser known but interesting. Kind of this whole slate of 10 movies is really interesting. Like, I think I chose to highlight 5 of them, and you could really pick any 5, and there's an absolutely legitimate case to be made, and I wouldn't be arguing with any. I mean, even my 5, I didn't include Seven Samurai, which is, some people think, one of the by far the best films ever made, and it's incredible. And if you have the chance, go see it for sure on the big screen as part of this series. But it's not like personally the one that draws me the most. So I did want to start. I mentioned Stray Dog. That's one of his earlier features. It's actually the earliest film in this series from 1949. And what I really like about it is that I started off watching Kurosawa movies really with kind of the samurai ones, with Seven Samurai, with Yojimbo, even Rashomon, very, period piece. And Stray Dog is set in contemporary 1940s Japan. A rookie cop loses his gun and while on duty, and has to track it down over the course of this day in like bustling 40s Tokyo. And it's like just such a great, almost, on the ground documentary of Tokyo at this time as well. And this is Toshiro Mifune. I'm not positive if this is his first film with Kurosawa, but it's certainly on the early side. And he's so young in this when you look at him compared to the later, even like Yojimbo that we'll talk about. He just feels like a different actor. And this movie is one that I end up recommending a lot for Kurosawa or talking about. I think because it does feel like one of the a little bit lesser known titles, and so it's kind of fun to pull out because it is such a kind of can't miss movie. I really think people who go to see this will love it. And then the next one I have is Kurosawa's Throne of Blood from 1967, and the reason I chose this one is because I think it represents, Kurosawa did 3 Shakespeare adaptations, and this is the only one showing in this retrospective. So I thought that was kind of an easy one to highlight because they are such unique adaptations. And this one is an adaptation of Macbeth, and is probably the most kind of straightforward, literal adaptation of Shakespeare for Kurosawa. But I think it is probably the most successful overall from beginning to end. And the Toshiro Mifune performance is just, incredible, of stepping into the Macbeth role. And it's kind of most famous moments are really the climactic siege at the end, where this incredible cornering of of Mifune in his castle and with this bow and arrow battle. And, that's usually what gets highlighted. But I really think this is, that's a special one. And then the next one I want to highlight is Yojimbo and Sanjuro. And these ones, especially for people that kind of grew up or were more familiar with Clint Eastwood, I think these were often kind of the entry point for Kurosawa, because the Dollars trilogy, A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, is comes from these Kurosawa movies. A Fistful of Dollars is pretty much a straight Yojimbo remake, and these ones are period set Japan. A lone samurai comes to town and it ends up getting sort of split between the two rival factions in town, playing them against each other. And I think what I really like about these ones in comparison to the Leone Eastwood ones too is just the Mifune character is like so witty and fun. I mean, Eastwood is great, but this one has a slightly more comic tinge to it, in kind of the action setting. And I really like that a lot. And then the last one I'll highlight is High and Low, the 1963 Kurosawa movie. And this is, for me, I remember seeing this and just being struck by how odd, it's one of the more unique structures of a film. And it's a very like two-part film, and you just don't see this very much, especially with something that holds up end to end like this film, where the first part of this movie is like a parlor drama, essentially set in this Tokyo businessman's office, played by Toshiro Mifune, of course. And he gets a call, and it's a kidnapper, and his son has been kidnapped, and they're negotiating the ransom. Well, at the same time, he has this big business deal going down, and it all takes place in this office. And then, quite abruptly, we're taken out of the office, and then suddenly it's a police procedural with Tokyo cops, tracking down the kidnapper. And so it's a very like high and low. It's like businessman and cop. It's like these two parts of this story. And I mean, I think this movie's getting a lot of attention right now as well, because Spike Lee just did a remake of it, and that's coming out this August as well. So you'll be able to see this and Spike Lee's new version in the theater. So, the other movies, just to say in this, are The Hidden Fortress, which is, of course, any Star Wars fan who hasn't seen this, it's pretty enjoyable on its own, but from that respect too, of seeing kind of the origins of Star Wars in it. And then Seven Samurai, Rashomon, Redbeard, and Ikiru. But I want to jump to the next director here, and that's at Brain Dead, the John Waters spotlight. And John Waters, for me, is someone who I never did kind of this retrospective where I watched a bunch in a row. It was always, kind of piecemeal, discovering them here and there. And I really knew him from his kind of Hollywood work, which was like Hairspray onwards, and Crybaby, and Serial Mom, and sort of just a little bit of a odd comedy, a little bit figure, and didn't realize, his early stuff and just how out there it is. And I think that's what I love about returning to those films, like Multiple Maniacs and Pink Flamingos, is that they just really push the boundaries, and they're still shocking to this day. And so they're showing 8 of his films. Again, like, there's so many, kind of easy wins to pick here. I highlighted 3. 2 of them I highlighted kind of specifically because they are on 35 millimeter. The only 2 in the series on 35, and that's Pecker from 1998, kind of his last, maybe overall successful movie in terms of just holding up as a film. He did go on to, he's made After the Cecil B. Demented and A Dirty Shame, which, have their fans and like have their great parts. But this is maybe what I feel like is his last beginning to end kind of, great movie. And then I've got Pink Flamingos, of course, probably his most famous title or one that gets referenced the most with Divine. And then the other one I have that I highlighted is Polyester from 1981. And this one's kind of interesting to me because it is the bridge between his early, very lo-fi, low budget works and then Hairspray, which would come later in the 80s. And Polyester is just, there's more of a budget there. It's very stylized. And then his next film after that would be the movie Hairspray. And then there's two other kind of interesting things going on at Brain Dead. One is this 1984 Paul Morrissey film, Mixed Blood. I've never actually seen it. I've wanted to see it for a long time, very like 80s sleazy New York. And this is being presented by Hollywood Entertainment for Cinematographe is doing a kind of a new disc release of this. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight here is TROMAWOOD, which is happening at the end of the month at Brain Dead. And that this is like, I don't know how much of a like marketing tie-in this is for Troma or whether it's just kind of like a fun thing they're doing, but they're showing 5 Troma movies, Sergeant Kabukiman, NYPD, Tromeo and Juliet, Class of Nukem High, Mother's Day, and The Toxic Avenger. And I only have seen Class of Nukem High in these, but I just have to imagine the crowds coming out for these films and seeing them on the big screen will be a lot of fun. So, and then the next filmmaker to highlight is Peter Greenaway getting a little series treatment at the Frida Cinema. And they're highlighting specifically his collaborations with the composer Michael Nyman. And, if you've seen any of these movies, that makes a lot of sense because they are almost wall to wall, big, like Baroque score and very visual films and just kind of maximalist cinema in a lot of ways. And, they're showing the Draughtsman's Contract from 1982, a ZED and Two Knots from 85, Drowning by Numbers from 88, and The Cook, the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover from 1989. And that last one was kind of his breakthrough, at least in the US market. And that movie really had kind of a theatrical moment and I think was nominated for some Academy Awards and got a lot of attention. And it's still striking just how bold and experimental it is when you think about that. It was kind of a popular, art house hit in many ways because his films are, I would say, quite on the experimental, abstract side. But really, I don't think stuff like this style would just seem so foreign right now and exciting is why I would recommend these, is that there's still a lot to be discovered, I think, in Greenaway if you haven't found him yet. And then the next venue I wanted to highlight is Cinephile Video and their micro cinema at the Cinephile Video store out in Santa Monica. And I've been kind of tracking their schedules, and their whole schedule this month is just fantastic. Like I could have just highlighted every film, but I would say track down, I've highlighting 3, track down the rest of the schedule and check it out. It's like really, really good about 8 or 10 movies. So the ones I highlighted are August 14th, Red Sky at Morning. This is from 1971, director James Goldstone. And they're showing this on 16 millimeter. And I didn't know of this movie, but like a few things kind of made it jump out to me, both that it's on 16 and it's set on location in New Mexico. And for anyone else who has recently seen Eddington, kind of seeing another movie set in Mexico sounds fun to me. And then the next one I want to highlight is the Charles Bronson, director Rene Clement pairing of Rider on the Rain. This is kind of like French art house meet Charles Bronson. And this movie has been recommended a ton to me. I've never seen it, so I'm very excited to have this one on the calendar. And then the next one is Tapeheads, the 1998 John Cusack, Tim Robbins kind of music industry satire, director Bill Fishman, and he'll actually be there, director Bill Fishman, to like present the film and do a Q&A, which is pretty cool. And then next we have a couple like single screening titles at venues to highlight. Playing at the Eastwood is The Heartbreak Kid, Elaine May's 1972 feature with Charles Grodin, as just like a great, comedic performance. And this film, it's interesting to me that this one kind of like keeps growing, I think, in esteem, even though sometimes it gets pigeonholed a little bit as like a romantic comedy when it's a lot dark. Like there's a much darker undercurrent under all the comedy of the Charles Grodin character and his pursuit of Sybil Shepherd, like, on his honeymoon. And just like, I think it's a pretty great comedy and worth checking out. And then at the Gardena Cinema, Quadrophenia is showing. This is a rock opera, well, based on the Who's rock opera, a film adaptation, but this isn't like a purely musical adaptation like Tommy or even other rock operas like Phantom of the Paradise. So it's a little bit more kind of about the culture, that Brit mod young culture in the 60s, and kind of a real time capsule feel of that period. And then the philosophical research this month has just a great series called See Sound, and that's music films, but really kind of deeper cuts, unusual stuff that a few of these for sure I hadn't heard of. The first is about the musician Sun Ra, called A Joyful Noise, from 1980. And then they go from there and they have a double feature of two films about Thelonious Monk, and then Monk in Europe, about this tour that he did in the late 60s. And then finally a narrative feature, 32 films about Glenn Gould, 1993 Francois Girard film that I haven't seen in a long time. I'll be very interested. That was kind of, an experimental art house, a little bit breakthrough as well, in talking about the cook, the thief, his wife and her lover earlier, kind of maybe fits in a little bit there. And then going to Vidiots, there's 3 films to highlight. 2 of them I really chose, they're doing a good job, I think, of showing a number of films on 35 every month. And so the first one is Mario Bava's Black Sabbath, kind of an Italian horror that I haven't seen, but, love poster and treatment of everything surrounding this movie. And then the other 2 I would really highly recommend. The next is La Femme Nikita, the Luc Besson film from 1990. And I've watched this calendar year, and it holds up so well. And it's like opening sequence is so kind of shockingly violent. I'll be interested to see actually how it plays with a crowd, if it turns off the crowd. But yeah, I mean, I think that movie as like a pure kind of hard action character film is really interesting. And then the last one here at Vidiots I'm going to highlight is one of my favorite films, like period. It's the Yasuhiro Ozu film Good Morning. This was his first color film from 1959. And it's like just such a delight about a family like getting a TV at a small, sort of a smaller city in Japan. And this family's life is upended when they get a TV. And a lot of it is told from the point of view of the kids, the 2 brothers in this film, and just, yeah, very, very fun film. Now going to jump to the new Beverly to highlight 2 double feature recs I have for this month. The first, and I won't belabor this movie because I talked about it a lot last month, Romy and Michelle's High School Reunion, is being paired with another high school reunion movie from the 90s, Grosse Pointe Blank. And I just think this is like a really fantastic pairing of kind of odd comedies that are certainly crowd pleasers, but kind of a little bit surreal, just a little bit, unusual. And I think, but, would be really fun together. And then the next is Wes Craven's first feature, Last House on the Left from 1972, is being paired with House on the Edge of the Park, an Italian film from 1980 that essentially, like, I don't know this movie, but it reads like a remake or ripoff of Last House on the Left. And so I think that's a really interesting pairing to kind of see how those go together. And just if you haven't seen Last House on the Left, like, it's such a seminal horror film, and still kind of the grittiness and like low budget like feel of it, is still shocking to audiences, I think, today. And then from the new Bev, I'll go to the Vista, and they don't actually have kind of a revival marquee release this month where they show it for like a week in the theater. Instead, they have new releases showing kind of in the prime slots. But there's two weekend matinees that I wanted to highlight here. The first is the Bob Hope movie, My Favorite Blonde. And I've never seen this, and really not familiar with Bob Hope's like films of the 40s. This is from 42. But I think that would be really fun to check out. And then the next one is a really high recommendation for me, because I think this crowd at 10 a.m. weekend matinee will be really good. And that's Elvis's first feature movie, Jailhouse Rock. And I got into an Elvis movie phase a couple years ago and have gone through a lot of them. And they're really fun, but I can't recommend. A lot of them are so campy, and they're such of a piece. They're like a little bit hard to recommend unless you know somebody kind of likes Elvis or likes this kind of movie. But Jailhouse Rock like stands alone as a great film. And I highly recommend seeing that if you haven't seen it. And seeing it on film would be really cool. And then there's 3 movies at the Academy Museum that kind of jumped out to me as just a really eclectic programming for this month. And so there's an indie movie from the late 90s that I hadn't heard of playing on 35 millimeter, and that's Chutney Popcorn, director Nisha Ganatra. And I really don't know too much about it, but it looks and sounds good. And then the next one is one of Robert Townsend's later films from 1997, BAPS, Black American Princesses, with Halle Berry. And this movie I often think about this movie as kind of this weird hand in hand with White Chicks, oddly, of just like so out there. At times you can't believe this movie was made. And that's sort of the comic tone of this film. And then, to counter that is Belly, the 1998 feature, actually the only feature film from Hype Williams, the kind of renowned music video director and commercial director. And this he did it stars DMX and Nas, and is very much of a piece of that like 90s gangsta rap world, high visuals. I don't think the movie holds up as like beginning to, and it does feel like an artifact of its time, and it is interesting for that. And I would be interested to see kind of how it holds up for a crowd. Oh, and then this next one's really interesting. I've seen some of these. It's called Meet Up at the Movies, and they're mostly kind of at these AMCs or Regals or larger chains. But this one caught my eye because it's the Grateful Dead movie, and it's being released because it's the 60th anniversary of when the Grateful Dead began, I guess is this year. And I actually I got into the Grateful Dead just a few years ago and had become a big fan. And I watched this concert film for the first time this year, and it really holds up. It's got a little bit of a Last Waltz feel because it's kind of the end of an era of the Grateful Dead. They're essentially taking a long break at this show that Bill Graham is putting on in San Francisco. They're taking a big break after this show. And so it's just, the crowd kind of feels like this could be the last time they're seeing them. even though, they will obviously get back together after this. And Jerry Garcia is actually the credited director on this, which makes it even, especially interesting. And this film, it had a long post-production. I think it was because, both because they took a break and the animation it's specific and kind of that flower child era psychedelic animation that is throughout this film. So the Grateful Dead movie that's at the Art Theater of Long Beach is the only art house I saw showing this. It's also at AMC's around town, and even you can see it in IMAX at the Chinese. So I'd be interested to see what kind of crowd comes out for that. And then also at the Art Theater of Long Beach is Carrie, the 76 De Palma movie, showing on 16 millimeter, which is a fun one. Oh, and then to highlight one of the Cinespia screenings, this is a fun double feature, a full moon slumber party, they are calling it, with The Lost Boys from 1987 and An American Werewolf in London from 1980. And it's kind of an interesting pairing. I guess it's because they both have a touch of camp or comedy to them. I think The Lost Boys is kind of I enjoy that film a lot more than An American Werewolf in London. And I think there could have been maybe some more interesting pairings, but it still would be a very, very fun time out at Hollywood Forever. And then I want to highlight one of the silent films with live accompaniment at Old Town Music Hall this week. This was kind of a cinema history detail I didn't know, is that Frank L. Baum, the writer of the Wizard of Oz novels, actually got into cinema in the early days, in the early 1900s, because he wanted to bring his novels to life. So he started a production company, and one of the films he made is His Majesty, the Scarecrow of Oz from 1914. And so that's showing, and I think pretty interesting from a, just a historical standpoint. And I haven't been disappointed in one of these Wurlitzer live accompaniments down there. At Whammy Analog this month, I mostly highlighted at Whammy some of their VHS screenings. I mean, I think that's because I do lean into that side of their micro cinema because they are a VHS store and do show some really great stuff on VHS. But two stood out to me this month that are digital projections. The first is the one that I would really recommend, and that I don't know, I haven't seen either of these, and this is called Vortex from the early 80s in New York, of this kind of wave of films that gets categorized as no wave. It was a very no budget, low budget, grimy New York moment in the late 70s, early 80s. And this is directed by kind of two artists who went by Beth B and Scott B. And so I really don't know much about it. And then the other one is Threads, a movie from 1984, director Mick Jackson. And this is kind of about a nuclear event in England in the 80s happening at that kind of height of Cold War 80s tension. Oh, and this one's really fun. This is a film festival. So it's not purely revival cinema, but it's called Big Bad Film Fest. And it's an action film festival that's at the Look Dine-In Cinema in Glendale. And it shows very much like hardcore, the titles have a lot of straight to video feel, even some of the stars, some foreign action films. It just looks very fun. The people putting this fest on do a really good job kind of with just the graphics and everything that's sort of surrounding the film. So I'm going to go to several of these. And the two revival screenings on the second night of the fest, they're showing Showdown in Little Tokyo from 1991, director Mark Lester. And this is a Dolph Lundgren, Brandon Lee buddy cop movie. And has, it's very, I wouldn't call it quite cult, but it has really big action fans really like this movie. And then one that I don't know is a Tony Jaa 2015 film, SPL 2. And they're showing it as part of its 10th anniversary. And then a couple last films to highlight. Oh, there's two that really jumped out to me at 2220 Arts and Archives. And this first one is being presented by Mezzanine Films, and it's a Brazilian film from 1983 called Onda Nova, which means a new wave. And it centers on a girls' like high school soccer team in the early 80s in Brazil. And right when it was in the early 80s that the government finally allowed girls' soccer teams to form, like officially, it was like outlawed up until that point. And so this is about like an early girls soccer team league, and about kind of the romances both within the team and outside that are going on. I just, as a soccer fan, and there's not a ton of great like soccer films that I would say for how big soccer is in the world. So that really caught my eye. And then this movie I didn't know from 1994, a Japanese film, The Friends, director Shinji Somai. And this is being presented by Acropolis Cinema. And it's kind of a interesting, I like the plot description a lot about this kind of elderly shut-in old man who befriends these three boys over a summer in Japan, and kind of a coming of age for them and sort of end of life, for him. And I think that sounds really good. And then just the last pairing to highlight here, a double feature at the Hammer Museum. And this is a pre-code double feature, which always catches my eye. Big pre-code fan. And so this is two movies from the 30s. This is Monkey Business, the Marx Brothers movie from 1931. And it's paired with a Universal horror, Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi movie, The Black Cat from 1934, based on an Edgar Allan Poe story. And I haven't seen either of these, but just like love kind of the different genre pairing, and think that would be a lot of fun. So those are my recs for August. Let me know what I missed and what else you're excited about, and hope to see you out at the Revival Cinemas.